You are just a few brush strokes away from creating a piece that you'll want to frame and treasure every autumn. This tutorial is all about capturing the golden and warm fall glow, and you'll walk away with a gorgeous painting you'll be proud to display. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started. I'm just going to pull out my painting supplies really quick. I have, of course, my watercolor paints, a paper towel, some clean water, and then some watercolor paper. I've cut my paper down to the size of an 8 by 10 today because I do plan on being able to frame and hang this when I'm done. I also have a lightly penciled outline sketch on my watercolor paper that will make this painting a little bit easier. So if you're like me and you like to just jump right into the fun of painting, I am offering this outline in my Etsy shop for a very minimal price. In fact, because I want you to give this one a try, I'll even be putting it on a 20% discount for this week. I'll leave a link for that, along with links and information for any of the other products you see me using today in the description of this video. Then all you have to do once you've downloaded and printed the outline is simply trace it onto your watercolor paper using a light table or even just a well-lit window in your house, and you're all set to paint. And then, of course, we do need some brushes to be able to paint with today. I will be using some of my personally designed Craftamo brushes, which I'm excited to say will be back in stock very soon. We only need 2 brushes for this particular piece, and both of these are on the smaller side. I have here a number 3 round and a thin number 1 rigger. And if you're interested in purchasing your own set of these brushes, I will leave a link for my Craftamo product page that you can sign up to be notified when they are available, so you will be among the first to know when they are back in stock. All right, I'm just taping my paper down with some artist tape really quickly to not only help a little bit with the warping, but it also keeps me from accidentally moving my paper out of the camera shot. And then we can get to painting. I'm really excited to paint this piece. Autumn time is my absolute favorite season. I just love everything about it. The warm colors, the cooler weather, crunching in the leaves, eating warm soup, and sipping on spiced cider. It just doesn't get better than that. But enough of that. Let's go ahead and capture a little bit of this fall magic onto our paper. Now, using the number 3 round, I'll just freshen up some paint colors here. I've been painting some autumn watercolor pieces lately, so I already have the colors I want on my tray. But let's start by pulling out a little bit more of the burnt umber, some Payne's gray, and maybe even some ivory black. I'm planning to paint the little clay pot first. This to me is the most difficult part of this piece, and I often like to start with the hardest thing first so that in case it doesn't work out or look good, then I can start over again on a new page without having wasted all of my time painting and everything else. But if I can get the hard part down and done with, then I can relax a little bit and feel more confident that the rest of the painting is going to turn out well. So I'm just starting this pot off with a little bit of water on here first. We'll be painting this wet on wet to help our paint blend and spread really good. You can see I still have a touch of paint in my brush because my water is tainted, but that's okay. We're going to be painting some darker colors over the top of this in a minute. The biggest thing here is to paint the water around any highlight areas on the pot. We don't want the paint to bleed into those spots just yet. All right, now I think it might be fun to actually add a little bit of color besides the brown and black to the pot that you can call maybe a reflection of the yellow and orange leaves. So I think I'll just start this out by taking a touch of Gamboge yellow that I already have here on my tray, and I'll place it sort of more on the right side of the pot here, going maybe around the highlight spot, and then letting the color blend more into the middle area of the pot. Then I'll take a touch of cadmium orange. Again, I already have some of this color on my tray from previous paintings, but I'll just blend that into the yellow color a little bit and then spread it out, going around the reflected light on the left side of the pot. I might even just take a small hint of cadmium red and add a couple of dots of that color into this as well as sort of a shadow color. Okay, that's probably good enough for that extra color in here, so let's go ahead and start adding in some of the burnt umber next. I kind of want to tie or blend this color in just a little bit, but I think first I'll just try adding this around the top area of the pot, maybe a touch of the lighter brown through the center and down on the right side. And to make it lighter, you just add a little bit of extra water. Now I'm wanting the right side of the pot to be more of the highlighted area, so we'll keep these values much more on the lighter side over here. But then when you're ready, let's take a bit of Payne's Gray and start blending that into the left side of the pot for more of the shadow area. Again, I'll just go around that reflected light over on this side now. I'm not sure that I have a perfect rhyme or reason for how I'm placing in all these colors. I'm sort of just kind of playing around with this a little bit, and you can keep doing that as long as the space is still wet. If your paint starts to dry, you'll want to finish up or be done so that you don't end up getting some blooms in here. But I think the biggest thing to keep in mind with the pot is to make sure to create one side lighter in value and have a highlight side, and then one side darker in value with more of the shadows. You'll see that I will continually and gradually add in darker and darker colors into the shadow side to get a nice dark value. This is where you can now start pulling out some of that ivory black to really emphasize that dark look. I hope you like this tutorial so far. I have had so much fun painting some autumn pieces the last couple of weeks, and I hope you have too. If you find that you're enjoying my painting and teaching style today, I hope you'll subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss out on any of my new and upcoming weekly tutorials. I have some really fun Christmas paintings in the works that I think you're really going to like. Okay, that looks pretty good, but while this is still just a little bit wet, I'm going to soften my highlighted areas now. I'll just rinse and dry my brush off and use the damp bristles to rub around the hard edges and just soften up those lines a little bit. Now that the main portion of this pot is done, we just need to finish off the top and bottom rims as well as the handle. I'll let the center area just start to dry a little bit before I do the rims. So let's go ahead and paint in the handle next. I think I'll paint this wet on wet as well. So I'll just take a touch of water that might even just have a small hint of brown color in there, and I'll paint over the handle area first with that. Then I'll take a touch of the Payne's Gray and using just the very tip of the brush, add some darker color in there. I do want to also leave some sort of lighter or highlight areas on this as well though, and because this is such a small space, if you need to use a smaller brush to paint this in, by all means feel free to do so. And after you get some gray color in the shadow spots, you might even want to add a touch more brown into the lighter areas, but you'll have to be the judge on that. Okay, now that the handle is done, I'll go ahead and paint in the top and bottom rims of the pot next. These are pretty small spaces, so I'm not going to try to put water on here first, but you can if you want to. Basically, I'll paint these in the same way though, painting with a touch of gray first, going around the highlight area, and if you need to, you can darken it up more with some ivory black. Then I'll take just a touch of slightly watered down burnt umber and add that into some of the highlighted areas just to soften that a little bit and make it not so dramatic. But I'm still going to keep this value a little bit lighter and a little different than the gray. I may not have explained this all super well, but I will zoom in onto the camera here so that you can see and follow along better with what I'm doing. Okay, great job. That was definitely the hardest part of this painting, and now that it's over, we can just sit back and enjoy painting in the rest of the piece. Now, one of the good things about me painting and creating these tutorials in advance is that I get to make the mistakes first and then warn you of better ways to do things. So right now, I'm starting to paint in the loose autumn leaves or flowers coming out of the pot, but there is going to be some background washes of color that go in and around these things that I should have painted first. I was still able to make it work in this order, but this is your warning that it might be a good idea to jump ahead a little bit and paint in some of the washes of color specifically around the base of the vase before you paint in these leaves or flowers. But since I did it in this order, I'll go ahead and explain what I'm doing while I'm here. This just goes to show I don't get it right every time either. But for these loose leaf or flower shapes, and I keep saying leaves or flowers because really they are just blobs of color that can represent those things. So you can choose what you want your blobs to represent. But anyway, I'm basically just painting in a base layer of color throughout the shape and then adding in just a touch of darker color while the base layer is still a little bit wet. For example, I've started a lot of these with a base layer of Gamboge or some yellow color, and then I just add in a hint of cadmium orange as a bit of an accent color that can blend into the yellow slightly. This just creates a look of depth rather than just having a solid flat space of color. Then if you want to paint some more reddish leaves, you can use a base layer color of cadmium orange and use a touch of cadmium red as the hint of shadow or accent color. And then in a little bit, if you want to add some even darker leaves into the mix, you can use a base layer of cadmium red on the leaf and then add in for the shadow or accent color a mixture of cadmium red mixed with some burnt umber. The choice here is up to you with which leaves you choose to do with which colors. You, of course, are always welcome to follow along with me too. Just whatever you want to do. Okay, great job. We are making some pretty good progress here. Now, we have a few little berries on some of these branches as a fun accent. So let's go ahead and paint those in next. There is some good news and bad news with these. The bad news is that they are pretty small, so make sure you have a nice small brush to paint these in with. I'm still just using this number 3 round. The tip is pretty pointy, which allows me to be able to paint in some pretty small spaces. But you're welcome to pull out a different brush if you need to. The good news is that because these are small, we are not going to have to worry about shading or any fancy techniques here. All I'm doing is taking some nice concentrated cadmium red paint and literally just filling in the circle. If you would like to add a touch of depth to these, you can paint around a little white highlight on the berries, but that is optional. You'll see me doing a little bit of both of these. On the larger berries, I'm going to try to leave a highlight, but on the smaller ones, I'm just painting in a red circle of color and calling it good. And I know I have these drawn on here as an outline, but feel free to add more or less of these berries if you want to. Go ahead and change it up if you feel like it needs something different. Now, this is the point where I looked at the painting and thought, dang it, I should have put the wash of color underneath the pot before I painted in all of these things. It would have made it so much easier, but it's too late for me now, so I'm just going to make the best of it. But all I want here is to add a very light hint of color around the base of the pot and maybe through some of the leaf and berry branches to add a little bit of shadow and ground the piece a little bit more so it doesn't look like it's all floating in the air. So I'll just take a touch of water. Again, mine is a little tainted, but that's okay. It doesn't bother me too much with this part. And then I'll paint a base layer of water around the pot and maybe through some of the empty spots of the branches, painting very carefully around the leaves and the berries that I have. Then I'll take a touch of different colors such as Payne's gray, burnt umber, and maybe even a touch of ivory black and just let some of those colors bleed and blend throughout this space. I'll try keeping the darkest values of colors right around the base of the pot and just off to the left side of it just to emphasize the look of shadow extending from the pot itself, but this really isn't anything too special. You don't need to take a ton of time on this. It's just a hint and splash of color throughout that can kind of, like I say, sort of ground the piece. One of the reasons I recommend painting this part in before the leaves and berries is because then you're less likely to blur and mess up the paint that's already on here by getting it wet again. It would also be a little bit quicker and easier because if you get some of this background color within a leaf or a berry space, then you can just paint over it later and it's barely even noticeable. In fact, if I were to do this again, I would try to sort of paint around the leaves with the wash, especially the ones with the light yellow color, but I'd probably just paint right over any of the berries. The dark cadmium red is dark enough that I don't think it would make much of a difference. I think while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and add a touch of this wash color at the top of the pot where the branches start to extend out as well, just to help fill in any empty spaces or gaps. All right, we are almost done. The very last thing we need to add into this piece are the stems and thin branches extending out of the pot and along the ground area. You are definitely going to want a small thin brush for this, so I will be switching over to my rigger now instead, just to help me out with that. And I do want the color that I use to be a nice dark brown, so I'll just mix up some burnt umber with a little bit of Payne's gray, and we do want the color to have a little bit of water in here so that it's more like the consistency of ink, and that way it can run on the page a little bit more fluid-like. You don't want it to be too concentrated or it's just not going to spread in thin lines as easily. Then go ahead and load your brush, and you might want to even just dab the side of your bristles onto a paper towel just to take off some drippy excess paint to keep your lines thin. Then use the tip of the brush to paint in the little branches and lines. Now for the most part, I like to start these out painting at the base of the branch and then moving the stroke out to the end, because there does tend to be more paint at the beginning of the stroke, making it look more thick. And you know what, I'll tell you this too, if you have trouble painting in thin lines, you can absolutely use a thin marker or a pen or something and just draw the lines on instead. Nobody looking at it is going to know the difference, and I promise I won't tell. Just do whatever works for you. And just like I said with the berries, if you want more or less of the branches than what I've drawn on the outline, feel free to adjust that to your liking as well. All right, great job. This turned out so nice in the end. Now, when your painting is completely dry, you can come back in here with a good eraser and erase any leftover pencil marks you can still see. I didn't follow all of the branch lines perfectly, so this just cleans up the look a little bit. Just make sure that everything is completely dry. You don't want to accidentally smear or smudge all of your hard work. And that, my friends, is it for this lovely autumn piece. I hope you'll frame it and display it in your home when you're done. I think people will be in awe of your painting. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had some fun and maybe even learned something new. If you did enjoy this tutorial, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel so I can continue to help you discover your artistic side.